everyone, and welcome back to our monthly educational webinar, Driving Success. Today, we're going to be tackling how retention is the new recruitment, tackling driver fatigue, tech resistance, and overall company culture. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So, I do have some good news before we jump into some not good news. Turnover rates have dropped from 20.2% in 2024 to around 18.4%. So that's good. People are staying longer. Turnover is not as high. However, the cost of turnover, just like everything else, has gone up significantly. The average cost of a turnover now is about $12,000 per driver. And that can both be direct and indirect funds. So direct costs are things like recruiting, paying for recruiting ads, paying for job listing, doing the background screenings that are required for both regulated and non-regulated drivers. The onboarding process, the training that goes into it, all those direct costs to the company. Then we have our indirect costs, which is the loss of productivity. If a driver is not behind the seat, they can't be moving your fleet and your cargo. The customer service disruption, again, if you cannot get your cargo to get where it needs to go, the end customer is not getting the product that they need. And then also lower morale. Typically, when you're running on a skeleton crew, stress is really high for the other drivers who still have these anticipated goals to meet. And it's just an overall gray cloud that is across the board from fleet managers to your drivers to your mechanics. Just everyone's kind of feeling a little overwhelmed when you don't have enough people. So that's why we say that retention is the new recruitment. And here's why. So retention saves more than recruitment. Time and time again, we've seen that the retention budget, the money that goes into retention, and the money that actually comes out of retention, so the ability to continue revenue, actually saves more than going through recruitment processes and onboarding new drivers constantly. We're also seeing that hiring is now taking about 24 days to hire. So it's gone up since 2024, which the average was around 20 days. So from a seat being open, putting out a job board, getting applicants, going through those applicants, vetting them, doing all the training, everything you need to do to get them ready to go is taking around 24 days. That's a long time. That is a long time for cargo to sit. Um, in that 24 period, we are seeing that it's about an 11-day average of qualification. So if your drivers are under DOT regulations, that there's additional steps that might have to be taken for those drivers, depending on your workflow, right? Of being able to meet compliance for DOT onboarding standards. Um, and then also just keeping current drivers is fleet stability. Like I said, if you don't have someone behind the wheel, it's not just, oh, we have an empty seat. Well, now your fleet scheduling, your dispatchers have to adjust, your drivers have to adjust, your fleet managers have to adjust. Everyone has to adjust for the lack of ability to move that cargo. So having imbalances or having a lack of labor can really throw off the balance even further than just like, well, we don't have anyone to fill this seat, right? So, what are the driver challenges that we're facing? So, drivers are feeling underappreciated, not respected, the lack of work-life balance, compensation, overhaul of technology. So just an influx of technology being implemented without any notice or involvement in it. There's actually only about a 42% acceptance rate from drivers of accepting technology into freely insect in freely accepting technology into their cab and into their work life. And then also burnout, just overall burnout and driver fatigue. The transportation industry is a very high, highly demanding space for drivers, for fleet managers, for owners, for everyone involved, it can be a very hard industry to be a part of, and so that can lead to burnout and just overall driver fatigue. So what do drivers actually want? What are they actually looking for in a company that will keep the turnover rates down and trending down over years? Communication and respect for work-life balance. I think this is a pretty straightforward thing. People don't like to come to work and feel like they're not appreciated. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. Uh, it's very hard to keep doing what you're doing, especially at a high need and a high expectation when you feel like you're not being respected or that your voice is not being heard. Um, they want predictable schedules, fair dispatching, and home time now. This can be difficult depending on your cargo, depending on the industry that you specifically cater to. Sometimes schedules are unpredictable. Freight comes up and needs to get moved. It is what it is. But just being transparent with that up front with your drivers of saying, this is typical of your schedule, but you may need to jump in every once in a while. Now, the predictability of your schedules will be better if you have drivers in your seat, right? If you have people to fill a seat, then you can predict and schedule a lot easier than if you are trying to pull drivers that have a few hours still left on their hours of service for the week, to get them to move some cargo. Transparency on pay, miles, and expectations. This is across the board too. If you go in to accept a job and you think you're gonna get, $5,000 for the load or whatever, and you get done and you turn around and now you have all these expenses pulled out and all this additional funds that you didn't know were gonna get pulled or whatever, that can be very frustrating for a driver who is expecting a pay and a compensation for their work, and it's completely different than what they were expecting. Implementing technology that helps and not hurts your drivers. There are so many great tools out there. There's new tools coming out every day for drivers to utilize in their cab that is based more around like technology and um, workflow advancements. But you want to make sure, as a fleet manager, as a safety manager, as an owner, that the technology that you are implementing is not going to do more harm than good, right? We want the technology that we are adapting into our drivers' lives to help them, not hurt them. And then lastly, to feel appreciated for their work. This kind of goes back into the first touch point of communication and respect for work-life balance. Drivers want to feel appreciated. They know that what they're doing is good. They know that they're good workers. They know that they're fueling the economy, essentially getting cargo from one place to another. But it's always good to hear from your safety team directly and the company directly that they're appreciated. So how do we get to the point of reaching these things that drivers are wanting? So tech acceptance, right? That's a big issue that we're having. Only 42% is are drivers okay with tech or like tech being implemented. So here are some things to kind of get that number up. So involve the drivers in final decisions or the vetting process. We have customers who do this today with cameras and other things where they actually take the input of seasoned drivers and they take the input of new drivers coming in who have a fresh perspective on things and really involve them in the decision making and the initial kind of vetting of those products so that one, it's making them feel accepted and it makes them feel better about the technology being implemented because they know a little bit more about it instead of just saying like, hey, we have this camera system now, we're using it, too bad. It just makes them feel a little bit more involved in that their voices are heard. Also making sure that there is a smooth implementation. So you have usually sometimes with technology, you have the admin side of implementation where it is your corporate, it is your safety admin, it is your fleet your fleet admin actually utilizing more of the analytics and stuff like that, making sure that things are getting into the trucks if there's hardware, um, making sure accounts are set up, etc. But then you have the driver side of the implementation, and typically that involves some training, that involves maybe creating accounts for drivers, getting them familiar with the new system or the new app that they're utilizing, and just making sure that you have a clear process for that so that when you do a rollout, especially if you have a larger fleet, the rollout is not painful for everyone involved and it doesn't leave that initial bad taste in the driver's mouth of the system. If you have a camera system that it's new and all of a sudden it starts beeping all night because it's a low battery or it's not reading that's connected to the Wi-Fi or whatever the alert system is, right? And the drivers aren't able to sleep. I think that's gonna make some people upset. That's not gonna be a positive implementation. So just making sure that you have a clear path, you are aware of things that could go wrong, and just starting small, really. If you have terminals, that you could roll out by terminal. Just having a clear communication with your drivers of what to expect with this new technology. Um, on the topic of communication, you want to make sure that the drivers feel that you're implementing this technology for their benefits, right? Technology that helps, not hurts, is really the main focus here. So it's safety over surveillance, and this is more specifically with cameras, but this can be for any kind of like behavior tracking app, as well. When you are implementing this because you want to make sure that they're safe, that others on the road are safe, and that others on the road aren't going to purposely try to do things to harm the driver, to harm, to get a payout from insurance. That we see that every day with cameras, especially that people are committing insurance fraud or they're committing, they're purposely slamming on their brakes for a truck and the truck hits them. And, it's really to protect the driver. Or some, depending on the technology, there's technologies that will reroute you because there's dangerous weather or there's construction. And when we run into safety factors like that, construction, weather, the risk increases. And so we want to make sure that we're able to give these drivers the best possible route that they can take for their safety, and for safety of others on the road. So it's really not a surveillance tool necessarily, but it's more of a safety tool and just really implementing that into the drivers, into their head that we're not going to sit here and monitor you all day. And you can really kind of give that message from the very beginning when you involve them in the decision making. You give them the material that whatever you're implementing, cameras, fuel cards, whatever it is, you give them the data to show that this is going to help you, not hurt you. And then encourage feedback, right? If you are implementing new software, or new technology, and you're doing like a test group or something, encourage feedback, whether it's good, bad, okay. You really need the buy-in and the true feelings of the drivers who are going to be utilizing this every day, to let you know how it is, right? In theory, new solutions are supposed to help, but sometimes they don't. They have some flaws, and that's okay as long as you're aware of them and you can go back to your sales rep and ask like, hey, what's going on? But encouraging that feedback, letting the drivers know that their voices are heard, and looking to resolve those issues, is huge, right? For tech acceptance. That will help raise that percentage for drivers wanting tech in their vehicle. So then we go into our driver appreciation. How do we help these drivers feel appreciated other than just like, hey, you're doing a good job? How do we do that? And that's implementing, if you can, an incentive program that actually works. Now, a lot of incentive programs are based on safety, right? We Safety as a whole is generally a good indicator of um how an operation is ran. If you have good scores, if you're doing what you need to do to vet your drivers, typically if your drivers feel safe utilizing your vehicles, then all things are well. So we want to do it more based on a safety and focusing on the safety because that helps with your insurance, that helps with your bottom line, that helps with delays, accidents, citations, all that stuff that could really ultimately lead to your company getting shut down. It is really based on safety. So the other reason you want to make it based on safety is because safety is measurable, it's controllable, and it aligns drivers and the company goals. So if you are implementing a safety program of yeah, we feel like you're doing a good job. Your loads are all making it on time, and yeah, it's good. That's it. We feel like you're doing a great job. And there's no actual data or statistics that you are tracking. It makes it really hard to make a safety program actually make sense. So if you're not tracking accidents, if you're not properly tracking citations, if you're not properly tracking how many times someone unbuckles their seatbelt, how do you actually know how that driver is performing? How do you actually know the risk that that driver is impeding on your company if you're not tracking that information? So you want to make it measurable and you want to make it controllable. And then also you want to make sure that it aligns with your driver, the safety goal, the overall safety goal of your company. So usually when you have an incentive program that's based around safety, like, oh, you had no accidents this month, you had no citations this month, you had no DVERs that were negative this month. Going off of something that's measurable is actually more beneficial than, yep, you're doing a good job, essentially. So some effective incentives, if they do reach what your goals are, is safety bonuses, right? If you can give out some safety bonuses, money is usually accepted without fail. It's a good thing to give. Recognition programs. So letting if you have monthly or weekly driver meetings, help with your terminals. Give recognition to those drivers who are doing a good job. Give recognition to those who are meeting those safety goals. And then others around them will feel like they want to also meet those goals as well. And then also milestone rewards. So if you don't want to just do it on oh, you had no accidents this month. All right, and now we're moving on. But you can make it an even bigger thing that, okay, you've now had no accidents for 6 months, or you've had no accidents for 100,000 miles, or you haven't had a roadside breakdown because you're doing your DVIRs properly in over a year. Big making it a milestone instead of just okay, good job this month. It gives the driver something to continuously work towards and feel proud when they reach that goal. You can also expand to include career growth and communication, depending on how your company is structured, that it can lead to growth in the company, different positions, and overall just voice in the company. But that is kind of, depending on the structure of how you guys have your company divvied up. Um, so one thing I want to talk about specifically in regards to combating driver fatigue. Fatigue is a safety hazard and a retention risk. And actually 13% of commercial motor vehicle drivers were fatigued when they were involved in a crash. So it is a big factor to overall safety of your fleet if your driver is fatigued. Now, what causes driver fatigue? Long hours, poor schedules, insufficient rest culture. These are all things that could lead to a driver not only and when I'm talking fatigue specifically about the crashes, it's like being tired, but this can also be implemented into burnout, right? That's a big thing now. Company culture wise is being burnt out, and just not wanting to do your job anymore, essentially. These can go hand in hand. So long hours, poor scheduling, insufficient rest culture. Some solutions is rest and recovery policies and training, taking the rest that your drivers need seriously. It is hours of service, right? There are hours of service regulations out there. However, not pushing that rest and recovery is important can lead to some fatigue and burnout. Flexible scheduling, if applicable, if you can offer flexible schedules for your drivers, that can give them a little bit more opportunity for some wiggle room to deal with their personal life as well. Again, take these solutions that work for your business, see if they work or not. But having a flexible schedule, especially when you have enough drivers to fill seats, could very much be possible. For team monitoring technology, so implement cameras that watch when a driver is drifting off asleep, stuff like that, lane departure, stuff like that. Put that technology in the truck so that you know when a driver may be to their limits and they don't want to admit it. Um, Wellness programs, nutrition, fitness, and sleep awareness. So there's a direct correlation between nutrition, eating proper foods, moving your body, being just overall wellness state. That can directly lead to tiredness and fatigue and just overall performance in any work environment. So having wellness programs and having good programs that encourage sleep and encourage nutrition and that could be one of those incentive programs that you have. How many times did you make a healthier choice when you were ordering food or something like that? It really there is a correlation between overall health and the feeling of being tired and overworked and just bleh about yourself. And then know your drivers. This is something that's going to take time, right? But with drivers where you know their behaviors, you know the way they act, if they're acting a little off or they're acting a little, they just look tired, ask them, make sure that they're okay and make sure they truly are okay and they don't feel the pressure of I'm about to fall asleep at the wheel here, but I need to get this load, to the other side of the country. Just know your drivers and know the signs. So some things to think about outside of like direct correlation with like onboarding or anything like that. So your CSA score, so this is something that can affect your overall driver retention. If you have unfavorable CSA scores, what does that mean? Added stress for your drivers. They're constantly getting pulled over at the scale because you have a low CSA score and the DOT officer is picking on them. That's going to be frustrating because they have probably a deadline that they need to reach, and having a roadside inspection is just going to add more time than they should be. Having when we have those road checks, if a company has an unfavorable FMCSA score, they potentially could get picked on a little bit more, and it just causes overall downtime for your drivers. Drivers want to drive. They don't want to deal with police officers and try to, not get tickets. Nope, nobody likes to do that. Yeah, anyways, if you're pulled over, it's not a favorable event. Onboarding, making sure that you have an adequate onboarding workflow, not just for your drivers that are under DOT regulations, because if you're following the steps, right, and being DOT compliant, though the ability to find good qualified drivers is set into place. But those drivers that aren't under DOT and maybe not have to go through as strenuous background checks or as strenuous like road tests and everything, those typically can have a higher turnover rate because it's easier to get in the door and just be like, yeah, I don't want to do this and move away because they don't have as much skin in the game, essentially. So having adequate onboarding, making sure that even if they're not operating under DOT regulations, that they're meeting a standard for your company, will can typically have the drivers stay longer. It's just vetting those drivers overall, just find better people to fill a seat. And then also looking at your equipment. Outdated or poorly maintained trucks frustrate drivers. If your trucks are constantly breaking down, if your maintenance crew is not fixing what the drivers are reporting, if they feel, unsafe in the equipment that you're providing, they're most likely not going to want to keep driving for you. You're on your way to work and you get a flat tire. That's frustrating to you. How do you imagine what a driver feels when they get a flat tire or something blows because the maintenance crew didn't fix it and now they're stuck on the side of the road with $100,000 worth of cargo in the back of their truck and they can't get it to where they need it to get to. They can't complete the job. So just these are kind of just other areas to check into instead of directly, just your driver, what your driver is wanting, but things that can impact the drivers, not indirectly, but a little bit more indirect than day-to-day day-to-day things. So here's key takeaways. Turnover costs are rising despite the slight improvement in rates. So we want to make sure that we're keeping the trend of turnover percentages going down as the cost of everything keeps rising. Retention is the most cost-effective solution. Time and time again, it shows that keeping a driver happy and behind the wheel costs so much less than trying to refill a seat. And then our focus areas are communication, fatigue management, tech acceptance, safety incentives. So the overall goal that we want to preach is to build a culture where drivers stay, thrive, and trust the fleet. Now, there are, some solutions out there that can help with this. TripDog, our technology department has many solutions that we can provide from ELDs to cameras to fuel cards that can make implementing a safety incentive program much easier because you're getting the data that you need, but also having adequate technology that we trust, that you can trust for your drivers to actually accept and like. And then we have DQM Connect, and that's our driver file management platform. Super easy for a driver to keep their driver's license, medical card, all that stuff up to date, do tasks while they're on the road. It's just an overall great workflow from both the admin and the driver's side. So, both of these departments and solutions can really help with happy drivers, essentially. So. I want to thank everyone for joining us this month for our Driving Success webinar. And as always, stay safe, stay compliant, and keep driving success. Thank you.